Okay, stand by. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to our FY 2024 Budget Kickoff. My name is Jessica Garza, and I am the Interim Director of the Budget and Fiscal Policy Department. Before we get started, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and to introduce the rest of the Budget Kickoff team. Joining me today is Ms. Barbara Parker, First Assistant to the County Auditor, or County Auditor First Assistant. Sorry. Okay. And Ms. Minnie Holguin, our Chief Human Resource Officer. If you're joining us virtually today, please submit your questions to Berenice Varillas through Teams, and we will respond at the end of the presentation. And now to kick off our presentation, I'd like to introduce Ms. Betsy Keller, our County Administrator.
I never get an applause at Commissioners Court, so I really might have to call you guys back up here more often. Thank you guys so much. So good afternoon, welcome. Thank you all so much for taking the time to go through our budget presentation. This is something we do annually to set the tone as to where we're at financially. Of course, we're giving updates all throughout the year, but I'm going to summarize for you all what our message is going to be this year. And basically, I think you realize we're in an odd time in our economy. I know personally, I'm kind of watching like what's happening in my expenses. Some expenses are going up. Revenue, while we did get an increase, revenue may not always align with those expenses. And the same thing is happening inside the county. So our revenues are not raising at the level that they were raising at before. We're still having some growth in revenue in the county, but not as much as we used to have. But our expenses continue to rise more rapidly, and we're continuing to see some expense increases. So what I'm going to ask of all of you as we go through this process is to really be mindful of that. Help us control our expenses to the greatest extent possible. We know that sometimes those things are out of your control. I would also ask you, when you think it's out of your control, still push back. I've had contracts that were set to increase every year that I've asked the contractor to forgo those increases, and they've agreed to it. It doesn't work in all cases, but you can always ask. And then really look at your revenue. You're going to hear a lot of messaging from our team about looking at your revenue and working closely with our auditor's office on that. And I'm asking you all to really embrace that and look for any opportunities to maximize revenue as we get back into the swing of things. Hopefully that will help us get our revenue back on track as well. But most importantly, I want to speak about a couple priorities for Commissioners Court. Something that they remind me all the time, all year long, not just at budget. Some of their two of their major goals that they've identified is value our county family. And so that's all of us, right? We're all in this together. And the Commissioners Court this last couple of years has made historic investments in our employees. We all know that we've had a couple major pay increases over the last couple of years. We've also, behind the scenes, they picked up the majority of our health insurance cost increases. Even though we may have felt an increase or a smaller amount of an increase, they were picking up the lion's share of what the costs were actually going up. And there's other things that they've been trying to do to increase benefits. They increased our life insurance policies this last year. They're working to try to extend more benefits to part-time employees. All of this to help us value our county family, reward the hard work that all of you do, and also help us recruit and retain our employees, especially in this odd environment that we live in. So I'd ask that you keep the budget in mind, as that's one of our drivers of why we try so hard to manage our finances so we can afford those things for our county family. The second thing that's really important and is one of the Commissioners Court's goals is to strengthen our financial health. During the pandemic, Commissioners Court helped businesses by using $10 million of our reserves to help businesses stay open throughout the pandemic, to give loans and grants to businesses. and help them keep their employees, but we've been working to pay that back to our fund balance. We're now at a point where we finally are back within our goal of fund balance, but we really want to preserve that and have that financial health. So if we do hit another economic downturn, which I've seen basically a couple hits, and I've been here almost 15 years, and I've seen us have 2 economic downturns that we needed those reserves for. So we've got to make sure we now preserve the reserve. So that's going to be a rap song coming out from budget later this year. No, but we need to maintain that. And so it's with your help and the way you manage your budgets. We know you need those things to get your job done, and we appreciate the way you get your jobs done. But know that those are some of our major overarching driving forces behind why our budget team is so tight with that pencil and looking at everything we do, and auditors looking at our revenue. But with that, I want to turn it back over to our team, to Barbara, to keep us going. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate all your work throughout the year, and especially on this budget. Thank you.
I was going to say thank you, Betsy, but she's already gone. Good afternoon to the county team, and welcome. The Auditor's Office performs financial analysis and revenue projections year-round. And the county auditor is required by statute to estimate revenues for all budgeted funds and to project revenues anticipated to be available at the end of the fiscal year as of September 30th. The fiscal year 2024 proposed budget may not exceed revenue estimates plus the amount of funds estimated to be available at the end of the year. We don't have a crystal ball, but we do our best using historical data to perform trend analysis, and we are constantly tweaking estimates throughout the budget cycle based on changes received through collaboration with budget and fiscal policy, as well as departments like yourselves. As the budget cycle kicks off each year, the Auditor's Office gears up for estimating revenues after closing the books each month, with special emphasis on the months between February and August. Our main operating fund is general fund, so our emphasis each month is focused on end-of-year funds expected to be available in general fund. Our updates are based on the most recent fiscal month closed. Going into the 2024 budget process, the focus on the financial big picture is how did we end last fiscal year? How are we going to do this current fiscal year? And how does it look for next fiscal year? Historical data plays a key role in the ongoing financial analysis and projections. Fiscal and financial monitoring requires continual monthly assessment of revenues and expenditures. This is especially true when projecting future revenues and end-of-year balances. We look at revenues, expenditures, fund balance, historical trends, and other assumptions such as the economy, property valuations, future revenue cap legislation, unfunded mandates legislation, etc. Whether it's an economic or legislative change, we need to stay on top of identifying potential impacts, both positive and negative, that affect the revenues, with emphasis on changes that would impact 2024. We watch for such changes, but if anything comes to your attention, let the Auditor's Office know or let budget know so those impacts can get factored into the budgets. Collaboration with the county team is essential, and we welcome your feedback on any revenue estimates that you would like to discuss that may affect your budgets. The process is much more efficient when there's internal team collaboration and feedback between the auditor, budget, and yourselves. So how did we end last year in fiscal year 22? Overall, the general revenue funds as of fiscal year 22 totaled $344.6 million and increased by $26.4 million over fiscal year 21. This is a very good trend. The most significant revenue source for general funds comes from taxes, where 83.7% of total revenues Within taxes, approximately 72% is related to property tax and 26% relates to the sales and use and the auto sales tax. The next largest category is charges for services, which totaled 11% of total revenue. Non-tax revenue, approximately $56.2 million or 16% of the total general fund revenues in '22, is the main area where some departments might be of assistance as it relates to revenues of your specific offices, mainly due to the volume of your activities. So the important question is, how are we doing now in fiscal year 2023? The most recent fiscal month closing was January of 2023. Year-to-date results as of this month depicted revenues of $210.1 million, an overall increase from the same time last year of $10.3 million. A closer look shows this is primarily due to property tax collections increasing by $7 million. Sales and use tax is currently seeing slower growth from FY22 with single-digit growth as compared to the double-digit growth we saw last year. During COVID-19 pandemic, the county did see significant reduction in revenues that are driven by volume transactions or public access, most of which have been on the rebound as the volume of business activity increases. General fund expenditures for fiscal year '22 totaled $326.7 million and increased by $9.1 million over fiscal year '21. This is moderate growth, which is likely to continue. The most significant expenditure of most public entities relates to personnel. The county's personnel cost was $235.4 million, or 72% of the total expenditures, followed by operating expenditures of $65.9 million, or 20%. So how are we doing now in 2023? The fiscal year '23 general fund budget grew by $16.8 million, excluding the reserves for emergencies, and there was about $10 million carry forward for encumbrances from fiscal year '22. Unspent appropriations, those are things that we budgeted for but didn't spend last year, but we know we're going to spend, so we carry them forward. Carried forward were $66.8 million. Total expenditures as of January '23 were $100.7 million, an increase of $11.7 million when compared to the same time in fiscal year '22. This was mainly due to personnel and fringe increasing by $8.8 million, while operating and capital expenses increased by $2.9 million. The fiscal year '23 budget totals are $442 million, and if we subtract the reserve for emergencies of $23 million, we have a net budget of $419 million. That's for this year in fiscal year '23. The auditor's preliminary projection for fiscal year '23 is an expectation of an annual expenditure growth of $48.7 million. Without a doubt, these trends will be monitored closely, and attention needs to remain focused on intentional spending during this post-pandemic fluctuating economic environment. Otherwise, allowing the expenditure growth to significantly exceed the revenue growth could negatively impact the county's financial position and ultimately the decisions of the Commissioner's Court. In a nutshell, this is the county auditor's summary financial update of county fiscal trends. This has the actuals for fiscal year '22 prior to fiscal year '23 and projections based on the historical actuals. Projections for 2023 and thereafter are subjective, and due to unknown future economic trends and decisions by the court, they may or may not come true. Past trends are key for projecting the future in most cases, unless new information becomes available. Historical data shows revenue growth of 6.18% as of fiscal year '22, while expenditure growth has been on the rise and is projected to grow by 6.99% in fiscal year '23. The county general fund ended fiscal year '22 with positive growth. The revenues exceeded expenditures by $17.98 million, resulting in a total fund balance of $15.5 million. This is thanks to all departments. Over the past 2 years, we've remained in a stable financial position, which could not have been accomplished without the collective team effort. What does the future hold for fiscal year 2024? The auditor's revenue projections are a work in progress, But with COVID-19 environment in recovery, it's still a challenge. Both the auditors and budget and fiscal policy remain cautiously optimistic regarding the tax revenues, both property and sales taxes, and we'll be assessing data between now and July to get a better sense of the future projections. It's the non-tax categories that are the real challenge, and these are contingent on continued resumption of growth of fee-based services. Overall, the county for several years has experienced the best financial condition in history, which enabled them to step back and be more strategically focused as we move forward. This is what reserves are for, to provide a cushion to take you through the rough economic times, like a savings account. The auditor's goal is to ensure realistic projections in all areas. We'll continue to collaborate with the county team, and we're hopefully optimistic that the major tax revenues, which are currently 83% of the projected 24 revenues, will continue on track, either in line or in moderate continued growth. As mentioned before, the other non-tax service revenues will remain a challenge. The impact on reserves will depend on the level to which expenditures exceed actual revenues during fiscal year 23 and thereafter. When you look at the slide, the dashed line with the white triangle depicts the budget growth over the years. Green depicts revenues. Blue depicts the expenditures. The goal is to keep the revenues and expenditures in alignment, giving us a statutorily balanced budget. Future years' projections show expenditure growth outpacing revenues. This is because we don't project future changes to the ad valorem taxes other than just growth. We don't do any projections for the tax rates themselves because that's a court decision. Caution is warranted in the light of the ad valorem tax revenue being subject to the 3.5% revenue cap, which began in fiscal year 2020, and the proposed legislation this legislative session, which brings the revenue cap to the no new revenue rate and future economic uncertainty. The red line depicts the annual financial change, which is basically the gain or loss from operations, such as fiscal year 22, the revenues exceeded expenditures by $19 million. Orange bars are the fund balance or our working capital. You're seeing in fiscal year 22 is $116 million. The fiscal year 22 numbers are still unaudited, but we believe they're stable. The fund balance reserves, or savings account, are stable. They're necessary should an economic downturn arise, as Betsy said. Reserves help mitigate the extreme budget cuts while management assesses appropriate budgetary action if needed. A significant portion of the general fund revenues are received between December and February. We also keep a 3-month reserve of 10 to 15% of the subsequent fiscal year adopted budget, net of the reserve for emergencies. This means the reserves for FY23 would need to be at least $42.9 million or 10%. Fiscal year 22 actually closed with an uncommitted fund balance of 11.32%. So the big question is, how can you help? You can review your departmental revenues and trends, provide feedback and updates to the auditor's office if you receive notification of changes that could impact your revenues, provide routine monthly updates regarding the actual billings you submit to agencies. The auditor's office has access to this information on an ongoing basis if you use the Munis billing system. If you don't, we can train you to use it, or we can do the inputs for you. Department feedback greatly ensures the accuracy in revenue coding, estimation, and improves timely financial reporting. I would like to reiterate that if your department has a significant revenue line item in your budget and you're aware of trending changes, your ongoing input to the auditor's office would be appreciated and will ensure a more accurate estimate. Examples of these types of changes include department outstanding accounts receivable billings, legislative fee changes that impact projections, contract changes affecting revenues such as new or discontinued agreements with other agencies. The County Auditor's Revenues Estimation and Reporting Audit Division oversees the revenue recognition, classification, recognition of projected billing revenues. Various activities affect these tasks, such as court activities, collections, legislative changes, contracts, and other revenue activities. If anyone has questions regarding your department revenues or would like to apprise us of information to ensure we accurately do projections and that we timely capture your monthly revenue stream, please contact Donna Teague, our manager senior, Laura Martinez, or Renee Balderrama, both senior accountants who will be happy to speak with you. Their contact information is on the slide, and you can also find it in Outlook or Teams directories. At this point, unless anyone has questions, I'll turn it over. Are there any questions? I'd like to introduce Minnie Holguin, our next presenter, our Chief Human Resources Officer.
Y'all can't mess with her.
Thank you, Barbara. Good afternoon, everyone. Minnie Holguin, Human Resources. Welcome to FY24 Budget Kickoff. As you all have heard from our County Administrator, Betsy Keller, and our auditor's presentation, the county budget has a lot of moving parts, and it changes each year depending on county goals, new projects, priorities, available resources, and unforeseen or unexpected events. In the coming months, you'll be hearing from different members of Human Resources. You heard our Chief Administrator mention Value the County Family. Human Resources will be presenting information regarding wages, the staff adjustment requests received, and employee benefits. However, for the purpose of today's budget kickoff, we're going to briefly focus on one item, and that's providing you with an overview of the staffing adjustment request. We're going to call them SARs for short. Because we've made some changes to the SARs, to the forms, to the processes, and the timelines. Additionally, we'll be sharing the guidance given to department heads and elected officials, as well as the preparations we've done so far. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our tiny but mighty comp and class team, Elsie West and Cynthia de la Fuente.
Good afternoon. We're not really bodyguards. I'm Elsie with Human Resources. In January, several training sessions were provided. If you were not able to attend or would like to review the training, it is available through the NeoGov training, or contact us and we can provide the link to you. At the trainings, the departments were notified that at the time we did not yet know what our financial position would be by the time budget hearings commenced. But we asked that they be fully prepared, thorough, and to make an honest assessment of needs so that detailed information could be provided to the court when they are making their budget decisions. However, as mentioned at this time, departments are being asked to use caution and to try to help control some of the cost during our budget time. Should your department determine there is a greater need for a staffing change, there are some general components for each request. Prepare required information describes the department-specific information that will be used in the assessment phase. Departments were asked to communicate the reason for their request, their 5-year staffing forecast, any supporting data, expected goals, objectives, performance measures, and outcomes. They were asked to link their request. We asked them to link their staffing request to any county and department maps, strategic plans, or legislative changes that impact the staffing request. They were also asked to be prepared to mitigate any challenges that may occur in the staffing request if the staffing request is approved or not approved. And finally, departments were asked to provide department request ratings. They were asked to prioritize needs based on what is important now and what they think will be important in the future. This includes rating each request in the order of priority. As Minnie stated, we have increased the messaging to our department heads and elected officials, streamlined the submission process, and created a link so department heads and elected officials can see the current status of their request. The SARS remains in electronic form and has been updated for convenience. Each request will require specific information based on the type of request submitted. I see several faces here, and a lot of you were in our training, so this is almost like just a repeat, but you went through 2 hours. This is taking me like 2 minutes. There are 5 different items to consider based on staffing needs: new positions, funding source transfers, Reclassifications for the purpose of FY24 budget requests, reclassifications will refer to change in status, such as a part-time to full-time or temporary to part-time. And finally, there's auto allowances and supplements. Please note, for the purpose of the FY24 request, position reclassifications will be taken throughout the year. The SAR form was made available to departments as of February 1st. The deadline to submit any SAR form via the link is March 31st. This provides departments up to 60 days to submit their request. Additionally, all significant dates have been previously shared through the SAR training and weekly HR notifications, which are dispersed countywide. Again, if you're needing any of that information, you can always reach out to Cynthia or myself. Cynthia will be discussing the next slide.
Hi, Cynthia with Human Resources. So HR did provide over 20 training hours for the FY24 SAR process, and we're going to continue to offer training opportunities and open sessions. We had 50 representatives from 50 departments that attended the training, the FY24 SAR, budget SAR training, and we just want to take this time to acknowledge those departments. They're currently being populated, and just express our thanks to all the staff that attended. The Comp class will continue to be available to offer assistance to any departments with SAR submissions or form questions. These open sessions began on February 7th and will continue through March 28th, every Tuesday from 2 to 4 p.m. As Elsie mentioned earlier, the FY24 budget SAR training will be available virtually and may be accessed via the NeoGov training site for all those who could not attend or any department who would like a refresher. So this does conclude our portion of the presentation. We do look forward to continuously working with all the departments throughout the entire budget process. And at this time, we'll turn it back over to Jessica Garza.
Thank you, ladies. As you've heard before, our strategic plan continues to give us guidance for the future, and strengthening our financial health is one of our 9 priorities. As we continue to monitor state legislature, new bills have been introduced that may impact our budget. Unfunded mandates are legislative acts which require the county to provide services without reimbursement or cost recovery options, and more expected when this legislative session ends. New bills have also been filed that will further limit our ability to increase our revenue for our budget should the need arise. As you heard from our auditor, we are very close to our pre-pandemic reserve level. However, our revenue growth has now cooled. While we want to be sure to provide the financial resources needed, the court's priority continues to focus on increasing the county's minimum wage and ensuring an adequate fund balance. We ask that you keep this in mind as you prepare your budget request and continue to seek ways to improve operational efficiencies. As we continue our post-pandemic recovery and return to pre-pandemic levels, uncertainty in the economy is an ongoing concern as we prepare for FY24. Supply chain issues, price increases for equipment and operating cost will most certainly impact our budget, and we remain sensitive to changes in the global, national, and regional economy. As you prepare to submit your FY24 budgets, we ask that you inform your analyst of line item increases that are contractual in nature, are due to higher maintenance cost, increased service numbers, or costs related to the strategic plan and objectives that are expected to be completed in fiscal year 24. As a result, these items are also a priority for us in reviewing and preparing the recommended budget. As we are in an economic period of uncertainty, long-term planning is essential in preparing for the future. We ask for your help by submitting your 5-year plan for personnel and operating needs that are not currently in your budget. Your 5-year plan will help us identify key factors and trends that may have a financial impact in the future. It also helps to provide important information that will identify potential risk factors that may impact our financial sustainability. If you have any questions with your 5-year plan, please reach out to your analyst for assistance. Lastly, as part of the planning process, we ask that you review your revenue sources for opportunities to increase your charges and fees or identify new sources of revenue or areas that can be increased in the future to help us achieve financial sustainability. As we have done before, we ask that you plan to request the approval by the court of any increases by June so that the auditor has sufficient time to factor those increases into the revenue projections for FY24. The next year budget entry in Munis will be open later today under projection 2024-1. As in years past, it's identified by the fiscal year of the request, followed by the number 1. Shortly after the meeting, we will be sending out the budget memo, a summarized calendar for the 2024 budget process, and a link to the step-by-step instructions on how to submit your request through Munis. If you have any questions or need any assistance, please reach out to us and try not to wait until the last day. A few reminders for your next year budget entry. For salary and fringe accounts, please enter your current year amended budgets. If you are requesting any position-related changes, we will modify your budget to include any approved changes when the time comes. This also applies for the operating equipment account. Please request the current year revised budget. There's a methodology that we use to calculate the budgets for the capital equipment 600-311 accounts. For operating expenses, submit the request to cover the day-to-day needs, maintenance, technology, contracts, or changes in contract amounts. Be sure to identify in the notes any increases related to contractual obligations and strategic plan objectives. For special revenue budgets, we will review the request, ensure the requests are allowable, and we will confirm that enough fund balance or anticipated revenue exists to cover the request. If you are not requesting budget changes for your department, please remember you still need to submit your departmental FY24 request via Munis. If you have access issues, please communicate this to us, and we will work with the auditor's office to provide you with the appropriate access. As we covered earlier, if you are expecting revenue changes, please reach out to the County Auditor's Revenue Division. This way, they can incorporate these anticipated changes as part of the revenue and fund balance estimates. For those of you who have awarded grants or anticipate a grant award that requires a match, please notify your grant analyst prior to completing and submitting your budget. If you have grant awards that require funding from the general fund, please submit the request and explain how the request applies to the grant award. We realize there are times where the grant will allow positions but will not fund the operating needs, and these need to be reflected in your request. If you all have grants ending and you have a need to transfer positions to the general fund, please submit those requests to HR. To review the budget key dates, the budget process documents, as I mentioned before, will be sent out this afternoon. As a reminder, we do expect that Munis will not be available March 22nd and 23rd for the upgrade implementation. We will send out new instructions closer to that date for those of you who have not yet entered your budgets. March 31st, again, is the deadline to submit your SAR request. And all departmental budgets must be entered in Munis by April 22nd to ensure that our team has time to compile, review, and prepare recommendations to present to Ms. Keller. Lastly, please submit your 5-year personnel and department needs by April 22nd. At this time, I would like to invite the budget team to come up and introduce themselves. And we will start with Francisco Rios.
Hello, Francisco Rios, the budget manager.
Mackenzie McLaughlin, Budget Analyst.
Aubrey Cowder, Budget Analyst.
Danielle Chavez, Budget Analyst.
Erin Grijalva, Budget Analyst.
Lastly, joining us today is Lizette Sotero. She is our grant analyst, and so if you have any questions related to your grants, you can refer to our grant division. And we also have Berenice Varias. Where did she run off to? She's hiding. There she is. There. So the budget analyst information is located on our intranet page. And you can always reach out to your analyst or to myself if you have any questions after today's kickoff. I'd like to thank you all for your participation. Your collaboration and feedback is very much appreciated and necessary to ensure a successful budget. At this time, are there any questions for us from the audience? From our virtual audience?
At the moment, there are no questions on the chat.
Thank you, Betty. Anyone in the audience have questions? Okay. So we'd like to thank you again for attending our budget kickoff. And if you have not already signed in, please be sure to sign in on your way out.
Ms. Garza, we have just a reminder for everybody joining us virtually. I see somebody with their hand raised. If you can please type your question to Berenice Varillas so that she can relay your question.
Mr. Danny Zamora has a question that the SARS is due on a holiday. If he can submit his request on the 31st.
I think that is the holiday. Yes. Okay. To repeat that, March 31st is a holiday. That is still the deadline to submit your STAR request, so you can still submit it on the 31st. Do we have any other questions?
No, there are no further questions on the chat.
Again, thank you all so much for joining us today for our budget kickoff.